This sermon is from the series, The Unexpected King, the Gospel of Matthew. We hope that you are encouraged and challenged by it.
Back in 2020, I can't believe that that's almost 25 years ago, a psychologist whose name is Robert Feldman at the University of Massachusetts did an experiment where he had two strangers meet and have a simple 10-minute conversation. Now, he did a variety of different things. Some he just said, just have a conversation. Some he said, try and impress them. But to kind of create a little bit of a standardized test. But his goal was just for them to get to know each other and have a simple 10-minute conversation. That's it. In an empty room. But it was being recorded. And here's the thing. Afterwards, he asked the people to watch their own footage and flag anything they said that wasn't completely true. And what he found is that most people told at least 3 lies in 10 minutes. Wow. Now, the fascinating point was that this wasn't outright lies. These were just more mistruths, misspoken, small adjustments, little stretches, tiny gaps when things were kind of awkward, and that they maybe did something to kind of smooth things over. And Feldman had this quote. He said, "We use lying as a kind of social tactic to smooth out social situations, to make other people feel good about themselves, and in some cases to make ourselves look better." I think it's pretty interesting, isn't it? I mean, the thing about it, if you really think about this, is it is easy for us. We often think of lying as these big, bold lies, but the fact of the matter is oftentimes these kind of subtle things can seep into our own speech and our own language. Oftentimes we have good intentions, but the fact of the matter is the more that we kind of allow these things to seep into our lives, the more that our words have less and less veracity to them, but also weight to them. And it's easy for them to be kind of taken for granted. That's not the vision that Jesus has for us. And as we continue our sermon series here through the book of Matthew, if you're new here to Crossway, we want to say thanks for coming. But also, we want to just say what we do here is we just preach through a book of the Bible. And we are preaching through the book of Matthew. And we find ourselves in the middle of a section called the Sermon on the Mount. And we find ourselves in a section actually of the Sermon on the Mount, the second kind of big section, where Jesus looks at an Old Testament command and then he says, this is the outward command, but this is really what I want you to do underneath. And in all of these situations, he kind of says, this is the outward thing, and here's the root underneath that we need to root out. And again, he'll just continue this. And so today he is talking about our language. And so our title of our sermon is Take Me at My Word. Again, we are at Matthew 5, verses 33 through 37. You can read along in your pew Bibles, pull out your app if you want to. There are sermon notes in the back. If you didn't get those, then you can follow along. But this is the word of the Lord. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Ain't that the truth? All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. As I said earlier, we're in that section of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is laying out an Old Testament command and he's then saying what we need to be doing, the heart issue that we need to deal with underlying that causes the external behavior. And the Old Testament command that he highlights today seems simple on the surface. It says, do not break your oaths. Again, he says, you have heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill it to the Lord, the vows you have made. Now, it's true that the ancient Jews would often swear by God's name to give their words more weight. Sometimes people will say it ourselves, I swear to God. Now, we may say that a little bit more lightly than we should. But they would do that in the presence of a court or in the presence of other people. Samuel did it in the presence of a group of people, saying, if I did anything wrong, then testify against me in the presence of the Lord. But Deuteronomy also acknowledges it, that whenever you utter whatever your lips utter, you need to make sure you do, because you made your vow freely to the Lord with your own mouth. And so we see that there is this practice of them making an oath and swearing to the Lord to give it more gravity or more weight. Here's the deal, and this is where it is true. We can see it in Leviticus 19, verse 12, that if we swear falsely against that, if we make this vow in God's name, they were held at a higher standard, and Jesus lays this out. Leviticus 19 says, "Do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God, for I am the Lord." And so in the Old Testament, if you invoke God's name, you were held to a much higher standard, and breaking that oath was serious business, and Jesus acknowledged it. But our text highlights that there is some other stuff kind of going on. There was a loophole, if you want to call it. If you swear by something other than God, and then that oath doesn't really count. Maybe when you were a kid, you did this game. Maybe I'm just the only one. Where what did you do? You would twist your fingers, put them behind your back, and you would say something to your family, and you'd say, "Ha ha, just joking, fingers crossed." Well, it seems that the Pharisees actually created a way to take their oaths with their fingers crossed and not really mean them. We see it hinted at here when Jesus says, "But I tell you, do not swear against all these things by heaven or throne or earth or Jerusalem or even your head." And we see in Matthew 23 where he gives these woes to the Pharisees, and one of them is, "Woe to you, blind guides! You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath." You see? It's like you swear by the temple, it doesn't mean anything. But if you swear by the gold of the temple, then you're fine. And he goes through a whole list of them, the way that they did this. But the point is that in Jesus' day, there was this system where if you decided that if you didn't really want to keep it, you could swear by something other than God and not keep your word. You could say, "I had my fingers crossed," and people just had to get over it. But Jesus speaks very boldly against these things. He says, don't bother making these kinds of oaths. He says, "But I tell you, do not swear by an oath at all, either by heaven, for God's throne, or by earth, for its footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King." Again, he says this is not the kind of thing that believers ought to do. We'll see, let your yes be yes and your no, no. But if you focus on what can let you off the hook of your oath instead of the oath that you make yourself, then you're not missing the point and not doing what God has actually called us to do. It's not a technicality. It's about you keeping your word. And he makes an argument in this text, in that section that I just read, against these workarounds. And basically his statement is this: God is king over all. Look at those kind of kingly words he says. He says, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by earth, it's his footstool. And if you know Isaiah 6 verse 1, it says that heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. And a footstool is this grand thing, usually made of gold, that is part of the throne. And he says both of those things just show heaven and earth are part of God's throne, his reign, his kingdom, his dominion. And he says, hey, even Jerusalem is the city of the great King. So, and even your head, you can't even make that without it, because it's under his dominion and his rule. Everything happens under his rule. And the point that he's making here is, you say it's a technicality if you swear to something else, but everything is under the authority of God. And so an oath that invokes anything under God's dominion makes that person accountable. Psalm 24, it says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. And again, that quote from Isaiah. His point is, you swear to anything and take an oath, you can't play the technicality and say it doesn't matter, because you're swearing to something that's under the reign of God. And you may not invoke his literal name, but that doesn't mean that you're not invoking his power. And so you need to take your words carefully. Thus, every word carries weight before him. That's the point that he's trying to make. He says, for by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. That's his point. Don't focus on the technicality of if I need to be held at the standard or not. Rather, focus on the veracity, the truth of your oath. And he reminds them, it's by your words that you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. That's the point that he's trying to make. pretty heavy, I grant that. But I want you to see that he takes it even further. The end of this, he says that any system created to avoid this truth came from Satan himself. That's pretty beyond, that's pretty bold. All you need to say is a yes or no, and anything beyond this comes from the evil one. And so what he's saying is that this thing that the Pharisees have set up in a way for them to say something and not really mean it, an excuse to say, basically tell lies, comes from Satan himself. And we need to avoid it. And I think that's a powerful truth, that it's not just about your oaths, but it's really about our words. Do our words have integrity? Is our yes, yes, and our no, no? And that's really what Jesus calls to. He calls us to speak with integrity. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Really what he's getting at here is say what you mean and mean what you say. I think we all know there are people in our lives that if they say something, it's going to come true. And those are the people that you don't even have to second guess it or doubt it. You know it's going to happen. And then there's other people in our lives that they may have good intent, but the fact of the matter is they may not actually follow through. There's a big difference in the way that we engage those people. And Jesus calls us to be those people that say, keep your word and do it. And I got to say, the thing is, it's tricky. Those lies are often subtle. And it's because we have good intent, right? We often have good intent. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or we want to be there, but our schedule may be getting busy, and it's tricky. But what Jesus is saying is it's better for us not to say anything at all than to say something and not follow through. And that's really the point of the text. It's better for us not to fill the air with empty words rather than speak just for the sake of speaking or to soothe somebody's conscience. Now, for somebody who talks for a living and who tends to talk a lot anyway, this is actually a pretty hard thing, let's be honest. But I think what we have to realize is that the reason why Jesus is calling us to do it is because it actually reflects on who God is and his character. You see, keeping our promises reflects on God's faithfulness. God has been faithful through his promises throughout generations. It doesn't always happen the way that we expect things to happen. We see that even in the story of Jesus in the gospel. It doesn't mean that it always happens when we want it, but it doesn't mean that God isn't faithful to his promises. Deuteronomy 7:9 says, therefore, that God is God, and he is faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to thousands of generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. Numbers 23:19, God is not human that he should lie, not a human being that he should change his mind. He does not speak and not act. Does he not promise and not fulfill? And so when we speak and keep our word, when we speak the truth in that kind of a way, we are reflecting a God who does not lie. Also, speaking truth, that's just keeping his promises, but I think speaking truthfully reflects God's honesty. It's a little bit simpler there, but it's a little bit different, right? One is about keeping promises. The other one is about speaking the truth. And in this sense, I think we see it again. God is one who does not lie, Titus 1:2. Or Colossians, where it calls us not to lie to one another, since you've taken off your old self and its practices and put on the new self, which is being renewed in the image of God, the image of the Creator. That's the point of this text. Jesus is saying is, the more that we allow Christ to resonate in our hearts, the more that we allow him to have control of our desires and those kind of things, then the more that we will reflect who God is. And God is a promise-keeping, truth-telling God. Amen. Now, the other thing we need to do in this is we need to reject spin. Because that spin does not reflect God's integrity. I love this word. Actually, I don't necessarily like it, but I love this passage. It says, sin is not ended by multiplying words, but a prudent hold their tongues. And what I say, my image of this, when we talk a lot, we're more likely to sin. Let's just be honest. Right? I mean, in that situation with the Feldman quote, the fact of the matter is my guess is if they didn't have to talk for 10 minutes, you wouldn't have 3 lies. And it wasn't that in that study, Feldman is actually very clear. He says it's just interesting. He calls it kind of the social WD-40. I don't know how many of you know what WD-40 is. When there's a bolt stuck and you need to get it unbroken, or you need it to be able to go on a little smoother, you spray this stuff, and it removes the rust and all that stuff, those things that cause kind of division, and you can spin it a little bit easier. And he says that's kind of what lying is. Lying is those smooth things we say to kind of keep the conversation flowing. Maybe what we do is we give them a few more compliments, or we may maybe instead just not tell them the whole story, only a half part to make that connection and not tell them the thing that could maybe separate us. It's like they say, "Oh, don't you love Cancun?" Well, I've been to Cancun. You don't tell them that you hated it. I'm not saying I've never been to Cancun. I don't know. But you know how you can do those subtle things to kind of make that conversation? Again, it's not necessarily that you're outright lying, but you do these things to kind of shake it this way. Oftentimes we can even do it in the way that we engage with other people, or we can even do this with ourselves. We're not gossiping, we're just sharing a prayer request. Or we weren't really angry with our spouse, we were just frustrated. My tone wasn't as bad as what I think it was, right? I mean, maybe we say, "Oh, I'd love to be there, but I have a conflict," and the conflict is us sitting on the couch watching the internet. Or binging on Netflix. And maybe that's what we need. There's nothing wrong with that. But you get what I'm saying? We can twist things and kind of say this half-truth. And really, this is where Jesus is saying, maybe you forget something, and you just rather forgot it. And rather than admitting, "You know what, I'm sorry, I forgot it," it just spaced. You make some excuse for why something didn't happen. It's easy for us to do that, but really, I think when Jesus says, "Let your yes be yes and your no, no," he's saying, yes, keep your oaths, speak the truth, but also reject the spin. And we need to realize that we live in spin, this whole thing called advertising. I mean, how many of you have bought a product and it's not the greatest thing that you think it is? I don't know what my algorithm is right now, but I get these ads for a nozzle that is supposed to, it ramps up the pressure so well that you don't need a pressure washer. And I want to buy it, but I know because it's all AI generated that I'm going to be disappointed. Why is it that I just know I'm going to be disappointed? Because an ad is all about spin. That's the life that it is. And we're bombarded by spin. Whether it be in our politicians, whether it be around us. But we want to have integrity. And we want to be able to say those things that we can. The thing that we have to ask ourselves, though, is why do we do these subtle things? Why do we spin things? And why do we twist them? And I think that there's a great quote by an author whose name is James Bryant Smith, and he's got this book called The Good and Beautiful Life. And he says there's two main things that drive us to lie. Fear of what will happen if we tell the truth, and the desire for personal gain if we lie. And I think both of them are worth us looking at. The fear of what will happen if we tell the truth. Proverbs tells us that the fear of man will prove to be a snare. And oftentimes, some of us are people pleaser. We want people to like us, and so we may push ourselves up or promote ourselves a little bit. Or maybe we'll soften the truth a little bit just because we don't want them not to like us. And so there's a fear that if we speak the truth, whether we admit when we mess up or whether we tell them the truth that no, we don't like their favorite food like they do, even though we absolutely hate it, that they will not like us, and so we spin things and because we don't want their approval. Some of us are peacekeepers. We just want to say things to keep calm, and so we don't want to handle the fallout. And so we are afraid of what would happen if we actually tell them what we think. If we tell them that they hurt their feelings, or if they were unkind, or if the way that they're acting is foolish. And so we just push it under the rug and pretend it's not there because we fear what will happen if we tell the truth. Some of us, we've done stuff and we messed up and we know it. Maybe we did something wrong. We didn't do what we said we were going to do, and so we're scared of that. And so we don't like the fact that we might get a consequence for it. And so we just don't say, we tell a lie, or we don't tell them exactly the full truth to kind of shape it. So that maybe we don't have to suffer those consequences. But underlying it is a fear of what would happen if we tell the truth. And so we tell these subtle lies. For others of us, it's more of a desire for personal gain if we lie. We realize that if we just, if we are that person who just smothers people with compliments, even if they're not true, if we just are there, we butter them up, we're going to get what we need, We had a rummage sale yesterday, and I'm working the room. Hey, what do you need? I'll give you a deal, I didn't tell any lies, I gave deals. But having that kind of a thing with people is still a way for us to get what we want. I want to sell rummage sale stuff, so I didn't have to take it to Goodwill. I had a reason for that. There was a desire for that, and I had a choice. I could lie about this. Yeah, this thing isn't worth it. Or this thing is great when it's really a piece of junk. Thankfully, we didn't have that. But you get what I'm saying? You can butter people up because you desire to get an outcome of it. Again, for some of us, we are those peacekeepers, and so we butter people up, and we do that because we just want a comfortable and a smooth ride. It's easier for us not to tell the truth or to tell them something that they want to hear because we don't want to deal with it. Some of us, it's just the opportunities. If we lie, we know we get something, and so we do it. The fact of the matter is that we all struggle with this. We all have these things that are fearful, or we have a desire for something, and we often tend to bend the truth. But Jesus again says that we as Christians need to look at those things that are within our own hearts, ask the hard questions, and wrestle with what it is. Why is it that we are not having the integrity, or why we're doing those things that we're doing? I want you to know, though, that what we also see is that Jesus was a man of integrity, and actually it's his integrity that cost him his life. One of the things that was interesting for me as I studied this text and as I thought about it, that I haven't noticed before when I've read the Gospels, is how many times it says that Jesus was actually beaten and dealt with because he spoke the truth. And it's there in multiple occasions, especially John 18 highlights it. Jesus is before the Sanhedrin, and he says, you wouldn't have beat me if I hadn't spoken the truth. And his whole conversation with Pilate, it's again highlighting that he spoke the truth to his accuser. Pilate asked him, "You're a king then," said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me." But I want you to see that Jesus' truth led to his death. And his death paid for the price for our dishonesty. One of the things that Tom said before our confession is that we as Christians, we can come and be honest about these things. We can be honest about our sin because we know that Christ has dealt with them. They've been dealt with justly. Christ died for them on the cross. And there's this great transaction that happens, but we need to be honest about this. That Christ's truth led to our getting a great thing because his death paid for our dishonesty. And so we don't have to be fearful about looking at our own hearts and the secret motivations that can guide and direct us, because we know that even when we see things that we're not proud of, that dishonesty has been paid in full. That's why 2 Corinthians 5 says that God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, in him that we might become the righteousness of God. And that's why when our relationship with God is secure, we have the power to handle the truth. You see, because the ultimate person that we want to please is God. And so if it means that we may have to speak up for the truth, even if it's inconvenient or it hurts, then we don't have to be fearful of that, because we know that our relationship with him is secure, even if our relationship with other people might not be as good as we want it to. Or maybe we realize that, when our relationship with God is secure, we may not get what we want if we don't lie. But that's okay, because God has power and control, and he'll guide and direct our steps, even if life doesn't go the way we want it to. And so there's something freeing about that. We don't have to lie. We can let our yes be yes and our no, no. We can allow our words to have integrity because we don't have to worry about those consequences. They don't grip our heart as much, because the ultimate thing in our life is Jesus. And that thing has solidified that relationship. And so these fears and these doubts and these desires that aren't from God don't have quite the control of our hearts that they used to. Now, it's all work in progress, okay? It's not saying that it's easy. But the fact of the matter is that being assured of that is the place to start. And then we can do, out of gratitude, the last thing that I want to encourage you to do in that, and that is to actually think about your conversations this week. Do an audit of your conversations. Think back over the last few days. What are those moments where your yes didn't quite mean yes? Or those places where maybe you smoothed something over that deserved the truth. Think about those times and ask yourself, what is it underneath the surface that's lurking there? Is it fear? Is it this desire for something to be good? And just bring those things to the Lord. And know that we are forgiven, but still ask the hard questions. Because we want to be able to display with integrity the God and display to the people around us and to our loved ones the integrity and the faithfulness that God shows us. And that's really what the call is here in this text. The call is, don't lose the loopholes. They're bogus anyway, because everything is under God's control. But ultimately, let your words mean what they say. When you say yes, say yes. When you say no, no. And allow that truth to dominate our lives. Because we want to display God's love and His character to the people around us because of the great gift that He's given us. And the only way that we can do that is to grow in the awareness of those ways that we've fallen short and understand the attitudes that are lurking behind there so that we can bring even those to God and say, Lord, I need you to work in this and help me to do that. It's a tough challenge. Our words are easily bended. I think if we would be honest about it, we probably bend them more than we care to admit. But again, we're so grateful and gracious for the work that God has done in our lives and that we have grace, that Christ's truth and His death on the cross helped us and He gave us, overcame that dishonesty. And what a better way to celebrate that than communion after we pray. So let's pray.
You have just watched a sermon from Crossway Church in Battleground, Washington. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we'd love to have you come join us for a worship service on Sunday at 10 a.m. at 311 North Parkway Avenue in Battleground, Washington. If you'd like to find more information about us online, you can find it at crosswaychurchwa.com.